back to our live Dat Chat podcast. This is episode 6. We are live at the Balcony Sports Lounge in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. I'm Josh Katzenstein, joined by fellow Saints beat writer Luke Johnson of NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, as well as Clyde the Glide Verdun.
What's up, guys?
Social media specialist and savior and all of that jazz. And now I'm sure some of you are wondering why you were hearing my dulcet tones right off the bat as opposed to Jeff Duncan. But Jeff had some travel issues getting back from the Giants game, so he is actually still in New Jersey right now. So instead, we have Luke filling in, and I'm sure he will do a great job. He was also at the game yesterday. It was a 33-18 Saints win, and we will touch on that significantly over the next hour. We'll also talk about LSU starting 5-0 with their big win over Ole Miss, and just want to give a shout-out to our sponsor, the Balcony Sports Lounge here in Bay St. Louis. It's a beautiful new bar and restaurant with a great view of the Gulf of Mexico. And, you know, I really enjoy it up here. I'd never been to Bay St. Louis until last week when we did the podcast. And, I mean, it just it's a much different feel than New Orleans, right, Luke?
Yeah, no, it's actually the first thing I thought of when I parked my car out here. I was like, I might have to take my Wi-Fi here sometime in the next couple of weeks, maybe during the bye week. It's gorgeous out here. I'm going to try my best not to get distracted by the view.
It's a wonderful
I'm going to leave that up to you because I don't really trust Clyde.
That's fair. You shouldn't trust me, except for to make sure that all this stuff is running and to try to keep us on task for being done in an hour.
Well, the great thing is that when they're talking, I can just look outside the windows here and look at the gigantic body of water, which is beautiful, as I said. But I also want to give a shout-out to the restaurant downstairs, which a lot more people know, 200 North Beach. I had some oysters down there last week, and they're very good. Looks like a really tantalizing menu. And I'm sure we'll have dinner down there tonight. And it was really busy when I showed up. Looks like they have a great happy hour and all that jazz. So if anyone ever wants to come out and see this Dat Chat live, I would highly recommend coming here. You can see the new Balcony Sports Lounge upstairs, and then you can check out the restaurant downstairs as well.
Let's just make this clear that if anybody is going to speak intelligently about food out of this group, it's you. So I trust your opinion on all these things.
And yet you're the one that takes pictures everywhere you go for
I'm
food,
just,
and you make all of us.
I'm just an amateur food photographer.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, I irritate every single one of my my guests or my friends at dinner by making them hold off. We were in New York this week eating fried blowfish, which I never ever thought I would have in my life. And everybody's waiting to dig in. I'm just like, nah, wait, I got to get the lighting right. So listen to Josh about food takes. Follow me for the food picks.
Well, I was not there for the fried blowfish. I instead went to Chinatown because when I go to New York, I just like to get some of the staples, Chinese, bagels, pastrami, pizza, all that stuff. But
nice.
I'm sure everyone is not tuning in just for food talk. So let's get to the Saints game. I mean, Luke, it certainly did not look pretty in the first half. They go 0 for 4 in the red zone, have to settle for 4 field goals, but still they led at halftime 12-7, and then, in the second half, Alvin Kamara took over. And frankly, we could talk about Kamara for the next hour, and I don't think, any of us would get tired of it, and I don't think Saints fans would. I mean, every week this guy does something incredible. He had, 181 yards from scrimmage, 134 rushing yards, which was a career high. Which people forget because most of the time, he's splitting it up between the rushing and receiving. But certainly yesterday it was definitely a lot more running. And, a big reason why was that 49-yard touchdown run at the end of the game that, really sealed the win.
Yeah, I actually have the stats pulled up right here in front of me. We love the on-pace stats early in the season, but guys on pace for 2,500 all-purpose yards. Or just scrimmage yards. He is an unreal player, and when they put him in situations like they did this week, where they're like, we're putting the ball in your hands, we're going to make the blocks for you and just let you do your thing. He does the kind of stuff that can kind of take your breath away if you're just watching the game. He's an unreal athlete, and it's been really awesome for me getting to watch him. Have a chance to kind of establish himself with Mark out, and now they're getting Mark back, and who knows what we're going to see when they can just kind of put those two guys on the field together now, or interchange them and maybe take advantage of Alvin's explosive ability more like they were able to do last year.
Yeah, and I saw a stat today, Alvin Kamara, first player in NFL history with 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards in his first 20 games. And, I mean, really, this guy seems to break a record almost every week. I mean, the week before against Atlanta when he had 15 catches, he was like the first running back in like 40 years to have, 15 catches and 15 carries in a game. And, I mean, the Saints obviously don't want to overuse him. That was something that they cautioned against pretty much all offseason when we knew about the Mark Ingram suspension. So certainly, and now he's dealing with a knee injury, I definitely think that they want to, give him a little bit of a reprieve. But at the same time, it's hard not to give him the ball as much as you can just because, I mean, Saints players were saying yesterday, anytime you give him the ball, it might be 6.
Yeah, and especially when you're playing in these tight games that they've been playing in. Every single one of these games has been a game into the fourth quarter. Especially even yesterday, the Giants had it down to 8 points with a couple of minutes left to go before Kamara had that takeover carry that he took for the touchdown. A couple minutes left in the fourth, so they have to lean on him right now because he's their guy that makes him go.
Now, for those of you that don't know, Luke actually went to Florida a couple weeks ago looking for Mark Ingram because that's where he was training during his suspension. And I'm curious, I mean, just based on what you found out, how ready is this guy to just get back on the field?
Oh, God, I think just from a pure physical standpoint, he's about as ready as you can be after taking a month off of actual live contact football. The training facility that he works out at in Boca Raton, XPE Sports is really like a world-class facility with great trainers. He's working out at local high schools, just trying to get some run with pads on. He went and worked out at FAU, and I actually went through one of the workouts because I wasn't able to speak with Mark, and those guys are legit. I'm not a pro athlete, clearly, but you get a sense of the technique these guys drill on a daily basis, and you understand just how much different they are than the average human being when you go through something like that. So I think he'll be ready. I think he looked good in the preseason. He's clearly not slacking physically. He's keeping himself in shape.
Why didn't Clyde go out there and go through that workout?
Well, because obviously I do not have that connection with Lane Kiffin to say, hey, can I use your facilities for the next 4 weeks of the season to keep myself in shape and putting me through a gauntlet of NFL-style drills to keep me on pace? And that was going to be like my question to you guys specifically. And I think one thing we should definitely do when we have both of you guys in, I thought it was great last week, was talking about like the one-on-one matchups of what you guys were able to see definitely on the field. And specifically, I guess, do you think that the Giants were fully prepared for what Alvin Kamara could have done in that game, specifically in terms of how effective he was in so many different phases? And then spinning that forward to Mark Ingram, how do you see the Saints, and especially, I know we'll get into this later because even though Jeff's not here, we cannot go by this entire episode without talking about Taysom Hill.
We're
definitely going to do that.
Don't you worry.
There will be Taysom Hill.
So taking into if the Giants maybe took what Alvin was able to do or what he could do in that game seriously in terms of taking that over. And now how do you see Sean Payton trying to get both Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram the types of touches that you would want them to have to both be effective?
Well, so it's crazy to look last year. I mean, Mark Ingram had a career high with 230 carries. So, I mean, we all talked about, Alvin Kamara, who was Rookie of the Year. But, I mean, it was really Ingram who did a lot of the heavy lifting. And it was hard not to give him the ball when he's averaging 4.9 yards a carry last year, which is the second-best mark of, his career. He was averaging 7.2 yards per reception. He had a career-high 58 catches. So, I mean, they're going to get Mark Ingram involved a lot. And I think we've sort of seen through these first 4 games that they are lacking in offensive playmakers. I mean, obviously Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas have been the go-to guys, but nobody else has really stepped up consistently. I think Ted Ginn's had a couple good games. Ben Watson and Josh Hill, have made some big plays. But Cameron Meredith and Austin Carr, and Traquan Smith, they've all been pretty inconsistent. So I'm really curious to see if they build around Ingram, now that he's back and fresh legs, or if they just sort of give the touches or the looks that were going to those other guys to him while continuing to lead on Kamara and Thomas. I mean, right now, what would you do?
Well, I think you could look at this last week's game as an example of how they're going to be creative with their personnel to try to find an example or an advantage and exploit it. I think that's what they did with Taysom Hill, and they know they have someone there who can do some unique things, and they put him on the field in a bunch of different packages and a bunch of different positions, and I think when Mark gets back, they can use Alvin kind of in that role. And I love watching Taysom Hill do things, and I think he's an incredible athlete. But if you can do something similar to that with a guy like Alvin Kamara and just put him out in the field and create mismatches and let him get some more of those explosive plays, I think that's kind of what we see is them picking their spots to kind of deploy him and find those big explosive opportunities.
I think part of the thing with Taysom is that they needed a guy like him to fill in with Ingram out, because he was the second leading rusher each of the last 2 games, which is crazy to think about. But I mean, yesterday he threw a pass on the offense. He also threw a pass, on the fake punt. But he also caught a pass. I mean, it didn't work out so well. He got drilled in the backfield on a screen. Drew sort of hung him out to dry. But I'm curious to see if they continue to get him involved. I mean, there could be plays where you have Taysom Hill, Mark Ingram, and Alvin Kamara on the field.
Can you imagine?
And you got to pick your poison. And of course, that'll be the play where they finally throw it to Brees at receiver, which I need to see that. I mean, because all these plays where Taysom lines up at quarterback, and it's only been like 5 or 6 so far, but Brees is just standing out there, and they have a DB accounting for him. I mean, I don't think that guy's necessarily ready, in case that happens.
It's true.
And shoot, I mean, Drew Brees could just hit him with that spin move that we saw against the Falcons.
Great athlete.
And I mean, he's shoot, maybe if Taysom wants to keep doing the zone read stuff, maybe Brees can prove that he can be a receiver in the twilight of his career.
Because then someone's going to have to look up, when's the last time that Drew Brees had a receiving touchdown and a throwing touchdown and maybe a rushing touchdown possibly in the game.
I think I asked.
No, we are going to see at some point this year Taysom Hill have a kick return touchdown and a block punt and a receiving passing rush.
Fair.
He's going to go the 5 touchdown route. He's going to be fantasy darling of week 16 or something.
Yeah, and then that's when everybody's going to pick him up for literally that week, and then he's literally not going to play a single snap and a single lick. But I guess speaking of the offense, with the early struggles for them, specifically not only red zone, but just sometimes of not being able to get past third down, were either of you too surprised, or was there something that maybe the Giants were doing early on that were maybe stifling what Drew Brees and what Sean Payton were trying to do offensively to continue to get drives going and obviously punch it in?
I think a little bit. I think part of it was the way they were defending Mike Thomas. I think Janoris Jenkins is a really good cornerback. I don't think we talk about him enough, in terms of the top-tier cornerbacks in the league. And then they were, constantly having safety help. And a lot of the Saints guys weren't getting open. But then you had a couple plays, too, that, they should have scored, like the pass from Taysom Hill to Kamara. It was slightly, off target, but Kamara definitely should have caught that pass. So, I mean, it's just minor things, and I think pretty much all correctable. And the fact that, they had that stretch in the first half where 0 for 4 in the red zone, and they still won by double digits. I mean, it just shows how capable this team is. But quick sidebar, Drew Brees actually has 7 career receptions.
That's incredible.
So
I wonder how many of those came from Drew Brees, like the Brett Favre style where it's tipped and he caught
where it gets tipped, so you catch it and then you run.
I don't know, but I asked him, the first week when he lined up at receiver with Taysom in the game. And he said he couldn't remember the last time he lined up as a receiver. He said there were some, fakes. I think he told me he caught a couple from LT when he was with the Chargers. I see 2. I mean, his 2 best receiving plays were with the Chargers. He had a 21-yard catch in 2003 and a 38-yard catch in 2004. One of those was a touchdown. So, I mean, obviously that was, 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So he might not be quite as spry these days.
He was a little younger then.
I definitely think he'll be capable. But before we break more down, I think we just need to talk about, where the Saints just stand right now. I mean, I think, we sort of got lost early in the season just because, they lost to the Bucs and they were ugly against the Browns, needed overtime to beat the Falcons. But all of a sudden now they're 3-1 after the first quarter. And I think most people, it was a lot of talk about the first quarter of the season when the Ingram suspension came out. I think a lot of people said, they could still go 3-1. Excuse me. with him out. And, all of a sudden now, they're basically second place in the NFL. The only undefeated team left is the Rams.
Yep.
And, they don't look like, a team that anyone can beat right now. Because they were just marching up and down the field against that Vikings defense, which should be one of the best in the league. But I certainly think that, with Ingram coming back and the fact that the Saints have been pretty healthy, you could definitely argue that, even though they haven't looked their best, they still are one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah, you're 3-1, and they have not played a complete game of football yet. And this is a team that traditionally, the last 5 years has gotten off to slow starts and then picked it up. And if this is their slow start and they're not getting out of the box right, and they're still 3-1, I think there's a lot of potential for them to have the type of season where they could be, in the mix for one of those top 2 seeds. And especially when you look at some of the other NFC contenders, like Vikings are not looking so great right now. The Packers are, I think, 2-1-1.
2-1-1, correct.
The Eagles lost in overtime yesterday. They aren't looking as good as maybe some people thought they were. And it's still early. There's a lot of time to make up for that. But I think if you are able to get through this stretch of the season where you're not playing your best football all around and you're still 3-1, I think that bodes really well for the Saints.
And especially, if you just look at the scores, if you look at what happened to Atlanta yesterday or in Atlanta, outside of, I think Atlanta going almost 2 for 3 in terms of trying to knock guys out with the Tyler Eifert injury. They lose 37-31 to the Bengals at home, and then the wheels absolutely completely fell off for the Bucs, losing 48-10 to the Bears on the road. And, it didn't matter. Fitzmagic, I think we can say, has been snuffed out.
No, it's Mitch Magic now, man.
Yeah, it's Mitch Magic now. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, it's one of those things where, I think you guys are both right. Because, if you look at it, it's the Rams right now. You can pretty much say the Saints are probably a decent number 2. And then there's going to be a long list of teams that are going to try to be getting in that, 3 and 4 spot, whether or not, if you want to say the Vikings are still there, because you're right, the Vikings are 1-2-1 right now. The Cowboys are 2-2 because they were able to get over on the Lions. Lions are 1-3 right now.
Well, they stink.
Yeah, they're not good.
They only beat the Patriots because they have Matt Patricia, who knew all of Bill Belichick's secrets. But
exactly.
The Lions are not good.
So so sitting at 3-1, you're right. Now you get Mark Ingram back. You start to feel like the offense is going to look like what we probably thought, or at least what it looked like in the preseason. And now, if anything, after these first 4 games, it looks like the defense is starting to step up too.
Well, certainly, yeah. I think we need to talk about Demario Davis.
Yes.
I think he was clearly the star of that game. With 2 sacks, his first 2 sacks with the Saints, and and the first one came at a time where it looked like the Giants' offense was still doing pretty well. They marched up and down the field on that first drive.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting that Cam Jordan was still upset about that after the game. He said something along the lines of, we don't want a wake-up call at the beginning of the game. We want to dominate from beginning to end. And we haven't seen that, but, still, it was a really strong defensive game, a lot because of Demario Davis, who, was making his return to MetLife Stadium where he played with the Jets 5 out of the past 6 years. And, this is the type of linebacker play they've been searching for the past, 5 years, really.
Yep.
Maybe even longer than that, because they've been constantly switching out all these guys, signing free agents, draft picks that haven't worked out. And right now it looks like Demario Davis might finally be the guy they've been looking for.
Yeah, and if you look at those first 3 games, too, Cam was getting his. He had 4 sacks. And then they had 1 from Rankins and 1 from Davenport and none from anybody else. All of their pressure had been coming from that front 4. And I think we saw them kind of change things up this week. And they did rely on it a little bit more zone, and they did bring a little bit more blitzes, I feel like. I haven't had a chance to go back and watch a game yet because we were traveling all day. But yeah, they brought some 5-man pressures, and they changed things up a little bit. And Davis, you see that guy, and I don't know if there's anybody on the team that looks more like a football player. I think
Will Lutz, definitely Will Lutz.
Will Lutz definitely looks like he could shoot par, I think. No, Demario Davis is just a physical specimen, and if you are able to give that guy with all of his athleticism a chance to impact the game outside of on the other team's side of the line of scrimmage, I think the Saints can reap huge benefits from that. He's a big time playmaker in my opinion, and he finally got a chance to show it this week.
Definitely, and I think Dennis Allen is a guy we've not given much credit to this season just because they had all those struggles in the secondary,
right.
And you would think that, I mean, obviously Ken Crawley, P.J. Williams, and probably Marcus Williams deserve a lot of the blame for that, but so do the coaches. I mean, when you're getting beat on all these deep plays, it's definitely an issue schematically, but I think what we've seen through these 4 games is that they've responded after a bad game.
Right.
I mean, week 1, defense was bad. Week 2, the defense was much better. I know the Browns aren't the best offense in the league, especially with Tyrod Taylor, well, the way he was playing.
Right.
But week 3, they're bad again, really just because of that number 2 cornerback spot. I mean, Calvin Ridley, if he doesn't torch PJ early in the game and then Crawley a couple times late, I think that probably could have been a blowout for the Saints. I said that last week. I think they dominated pretty much every other position. But then you see they make the corrections again this week. I mean, it didn't work out on that first drive, like I said earlier, but they finally figured it out. They played the sort of lockdown defense. I think probably the game was not as close as the final score indicated because, that last touchdown, I think the Saints were just, they didn't really – I don't want to say they didn't care, but, I mean, they knew that the game was pretty much in hand. I mean, that could have just been like a 10-point defensive effort for them, and I think that Dennis Allen deserves a lot of credit. They employed this soft zone. They sort of changed up. They've been playing a lot of man-to-man, and that was not working. That's why they were being exposed in those deep plays. But that soft zone, a lot of guys on the Giants said, that was a big reason that they, were locking down the receivers, which is a tough thing to do. I mean, Eli Manning right now is not a good quarterback.
No.
So, I mean, I don't think we should overlook that. But at the same time, he has Odell Beckham, he has Sterling Shepard, he has Saquon Barkley, and the Saints did not allow that many big plays, and I think they deserve a lot of credit, and Dennis Allen especially does.
Yeah, two pass plays of 20 or more yards. And, I think that speaks for the improvement they made, I think. Because that was an area they've been just consistently being beat all year. And, the Giants drove down the field at will on that first drive, but they had to do it in like 10 plays. And one of those plays was like a 15-yard penalty on the Saints. So if you can make them have to beat you that way, where they have to string together these long drives, and you keep everything in front of you, that increases their chances of making a mistake and giving you something to capitalize on, which is, the first 3 games they didn't really have many opportunities to capitalize on because guys were behind them and the quarterbacks were making the throws. So I'm still concerned about P.J. Williams and Ken Crawley. I think they need to make improvements. I think Crawley was targeted a lot.
Yeah.
And Shepard, I think, was he had 10 catches on 10 targets.
Yep.
But the thing is they were all kept in front.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if the Redskins, I'm sure they're looking at the defense that the Saints played, and the Saints are going to have to make even more adjustments. It's just kind of how it works in pro football. But I do think that was a really big step in the right direction.
And I think specifically, I was going to trail back to Luke, your story from this morning about the defense feeling like it's getting its swagger back.
Yeah.
To think that going into this game, the Saints only had 1 turnover coming into Week 4, which is obviously something that they, knowing the Saints, they wanted to win that turnover battle. They want to be on the plus side of that turnover battle. But like some of the quotes in here, for me, signal that I feel like there's a little bit of a changing in terms of the attitude and the mindset. I mean, you look at Marshawn Lattimore's quote, "We came out here and we were playing for each other today." That's something that you feel like is starting to get a turnover. I thought we played one of our better complimentary games, obviously Sean Payton said. And then this one from P.J. Williams, we know we've got to get turnovers and we've got to get our offense back the ball and stuff like that. So that was definitely a big thing this week. And I think that was one of the biggest things I think that both of you guys also kind of touched on last week was the fact that they obviously wanted to be at least somewhat more aggressive, but they also wanted to be in positions to where they could create havoc and try to get the ball on the ground. And obviously you saw that with some forced fumbles, and then obviously you see that with an almost return for Marshawn back to get the touchdown, which I don't know what I said this today earlier. I was like, I don't know if he thought the play was blown dead or if he didn't know if it was still a live play. But once he realized it was a live play, he was going. But by that point, it was too late because Eli came in and just pushed him out of bounds. But clearly, it looks like once you hope that they get that itch for wanting to knock the ball out, wanting to get it on the ground, wanting to get maybe a few more picks and get some guys in positions to get those plays, maybe it starts to become almost like a disease, and everybody starts to get it, and maybe you start to see a couple other guys hopefully starting to get their hands in and start to get some more turnovers and get that back on that plus side to get the offense and the ball in the offense's hands.
Well, look, I think the guys understand that and Sean Payton brought this up after the game. It's you're stealing possessions away, and when you're working with the offense, the Saints are working with it. They don't need to be this world-class defense. It's locking people down to 220 yards a game. I think they just need to be a defense that is opportunistic and comes up with a couple of big plays a game, and that could be a 14-point swing with the type of offense the Saints have. I think that's the big thing. If you look back at some of these really successful teams in the Payton era, they've never had like the Ravens defense or the Seahawks defense. It was just like crushing people's dreams. But the 2009 team and last year's team were teams that forced a ton of turnovers and had a ton of the big plays. And I think this is a team that is built to capitalize on them, and that's what is going to be the key to their defense, I think. Yeah, definitely. And I think last year the Saints showed exactly what you're talking about, Luke, that they don't need to have the best defense in the league. I mean, they went improved to the 17th best, and they went 11-5 because when you have one of the best offenses, you just need a defense, that is capable. I mean, we saw the previous 3 years they were 27th or worse. Each of those 3 seasons they go 7-9. So if you can just make incremental improvements, all of a sudden you put yourself in a much better position to win games. I do want to talk about that Marshawn Lattimore play because I went back. This is great. This is the best.
Well, no, so I went back and watched it, and so Clyde, I think I got to defend him a little bit. Because he did say that he saw a guy coming. He wanted to cut it back. He said that he saw Eli coming, and he's
he
like,
didn't see
all right.
a guy coming. He saw Eli coming.
No. He saw a second guy. So he saw Eli Manning coming or in front of him, and he's like, all right, well, I can just cut this back. So he slowed down a little bit, set up the cutback. But then when he started to do that, he saw a tight end coming in. It was Rhett Ellison, who would have been in position to make the play had he cut back. So, Marshawn definitely – I think we all think he should have scored because he's maybe the fastest player on the team.
Oh, yeah.
But the funniest thing in the locker room after the game is that we were waiting to talk to Marshawn, and Dennis Allen comes in there, and he's like, you guys waiting to talk to Marshawn? And we're like, yeah. He's like, ask him about that fumble recovery. He was running, and then he gets pushed out by slowest quarterback in the league.
Wow.
And Marshawn was just like so embarrassed, and he started defending himself, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, I think that just shows that these guys are having a great time. They were blasting music in there, which is the first time they've done that while the media's in there. There's a lot of, like, New York rap and stuff, just getting in the moment. And the week before the media got in there, they'd actually played Never Scared by Bone Crushers, which they played in the Falcon Stadium before the fourth quarter. So I think the Saints are just like, they're taking a lot of pride in what they're doing on the road, and I think they're probably really excited to come home this week, Monday night against Washington, where all eyes will be on Drew Brees, and I think we need to talk about that just because all of a sudden, Drew Brees is legendary Hall of Fame guy, but he's going to etch his name into the record books next week. He needs 201 yards to break Peyton Manning's all-time passing yards record, and I think, it could happen as early as the second quarter.
Yep.
And I think I'm curious. So what would be the dream scenario for him to break that play? Would it be like a long, deep touchdown to Ted Ginn? Would it just be like an Alvin Kamara, 5-yard, juke and whatever? I mean, dream scenario for Drew Brees to break the record.
I'm gonna let you take this, Clyde.
All right. So if we were talking dream scenario of a Drew Brees style Hall of Fame etched moment, I'd probably say the most Drew Brees thing would probably be and unfortunately, I can't see unless it's like a barn burner type game where we're talking tit for tat, back and forth, both offenses are running at 100% maximum efficiency. He would probably break the record needing 7 yards and a Michael Thomas 7-yard slant or something like that on the inside. So, or something like that. That would, in my mind, that's how I see that record being broken. On the flip side of that, it would literally be a 77-yard Ted Ginn absolutely blows by his guy straight to the end zone, right on a dime. All he has to do is waltz in, and that's how he breaks it to, again, in a tight game.
Yeah, look, Clyde is absolutely right here because the reason Drew Brees is in this category at all is because he is one of the most consistent passers who's ever played this game. The guy's we did a big story on his completion percentage, I think, going into the Atlanta game. And the guy's just, I think he's got like 5 of the top 15 single seasons ever. And he's just always on the money. But the thing that always sticks out to my mind watching Drew Brees, like if there's the quintessential Drew Brees play, it's when he's in the pocket and you see him like look up like this and try to like see through the face mask or whatever it is.
So he's got to look over the line.
He's got to look over the line. He's like on his tiptoes, and then he just arcs a perfect rainbow down the field. And we haven't seen him like connect on one of those big long throws yet this year. And I think that would be if that's the one who breaks it, like that would just make perfect sense to me. Like a big, long, high arcing throw down the sideline, perfectly in stride to somebody who takes it in for 6.
You just stole my dream scenario, because I think before I covered the Saints, my favorite thing to watch with Drew Brees is when he's sitting there in the pocket and you see him scanning, and then as soon as that head tilt, he makes that head tilt, and it's just like, oh, he's about to throw it deep, and it's probably going to be a touchdown. It was normally to like Devery Henderson or Robert Meacham or something. So I think, and you're absolutely right, I think a long bomb to Ted Ginn where he does the head tilt, which I haven't really seen this year, even on the couple times he has thrown it deep. But like you said, they have not connected on a deep ball, so that would be a very fitting way to do it. But I also think at the same time, like Michael Thomas is so competitive that Michael Thomas wants to be the guy who gets the ball, sets the record. Michael Thomas wants his, to be shown, and all the highlight reels when Drew Brees goes in the Hall of Fame, like he wants it, And so, I could see it happening in a number of ways, but I definitely think, it's going to happen next week. But I think, there should be a little concern, against the Washington team that's pretty good, coming off a bye. But I think, that'll be something that, you guys, with Jeff and Clyde will touch more on Thursday at the Dat Chat at NOLA Brewing, where everyone should, come out. And I just want to give a shout-out to some of the guests that are here tonight. We have a few returning fellas that were here last week. Appreciate everyone coming out. And, I think, we could talk Saints all night, but I think we should at least briefly talk about LSU.
Very briefly.
And especially Joe Burrow. Where did these wheels come from, Clyde?
Shoot, man, I wish I could tell you that this is something that, obviously if you haven't seen his story, if you go back this weekend and see the story on Joe Burrow's hometown and how it's a little bit more purple and gold these days than it is scarlet and gray, and the reasons why, and kind of learning and understanding about, just obviously where Joe Burrow and all came from, this is not surprising. I think Joe Burrow has had... And if you look at, and I think the biggest thing is that I think if you look at Ohio State and the quarterbacks that they've had over the course of the last really 5 years, really since Urban Meyer's kind of been there, all of them have the adaptability to be able to be proficient at the run when they need to. And I think one of the biggest things that you saw this weekend in this game against Ole Miss was that he had an opportunity because of the weapons that he has on the outside, specifically in Stephon Sullivan, Racey McMath, Justin Jefferson, guys like that. You've got to take those guys seriously. And because of that, if you're going to spread open Ole Miss's defense like that, it gives the quarterback an opportunity to run. And I think that's also a big thing about Steve Ensmiger's offense, too, where you saw a little bit of it with Danny Etling, but I think Joe Burrow is just that much better at it. I think he's able to read the situation a lot better in terms of being able to know when to run, when to maybe get rid of it, and then when to obviously get out of bounds. Like that was one of the biggest plays towards the end of the game. He saw nothing but space and opportunity, clear daylight, took it for the first down plus more, and then as soon as he saw a defender racing up, he did a complete right turn and went straight out of the bounds. Like did not, this is the same guy who said he didn't want to slide. He said, no, I'm going to go run out of bounds, which I'm sure freaked everybody out because he thought he was going to take some kind of hit. And then you saw in the last play, or I believe it's the last touchdown, where he ran it in. Another reason why he was the SEC Player of the Week this week, because he was the team leader in rushing yards, more than obviously Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Nick Brissett, who also had very good games. And then he was able to dish shot through the air. I mean, he had a very, very efficient game. And I think Joe Burrow is the type of quarterback now, specifically for LSU, that can make the right decisions when called upon and is not going to get his team in trouble with errant throws. And that, again, I believe goes to Steve Ensminger, because Steve Ensminger is not going to put an offense together where he's going to make you make errant throws or make you decide to have to throw into tight windows that you know that you can't do, knowing full well they could lead to an interception or something worse.
I want to say this, first of all, Ole Miss has an awful defense.
That's also true, too.
They're terrible.
They're very bad.
But that being said,
we're in Mississippi, mind you.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that because I want to be the one to say that Ole Miss is terrible. I'm not going to be that guy.
Look, there's no doubting this fact. It is a straight up fact. Ole Miss's defense is atrocious.
But they're really good at unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. They're really, really good at that.
That's a talent. That's a talent.
That's quality.
But look, it still needs to be said that
yeah, it was the rain. That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. Totally the rain. I still can't remember an LSU quarterback having a game like this. I think we saw in the 2013 season when Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham were out there, and Jeremy Hill. We saw Zach Mettenberger put up some huge numbers through the air. We've seen Jordan Jefferson, for whatever he was, I think he had some games where he just took over on the ground. I remember a game against Tennessee where he had something like 150 rushing yards.
Yeah, he did.
But I don't think we've seen a player like this who can take the game over in a couple different ways. And on top of that, he's so smart out there, and he doesn't turn the ball over. He doesn't have a pick yet in 5 games this year. And I think if he can come up with something like this game where he was really efficient through the air, 18 out of 25 is really good. He doesn't need to put up 4 touchdowns and almost 400 yards of offense every week. He needs to be a guy who takes care of the ball and occasionally makes the big-time throws that we just haven't seen from an LSU quarterback in a generation. And it's been since, really like Matt Flynn in 07 is the last time we saw a quarterback like this. So they don't need much. Like, I think that's something that anybody who's watched LSU football over the last decade, they don't need much at the quarterback position because they're always going to have good players around them. They just need a guy who's going to be occasionally great, like Joe Burrow was. They don't need a guy who's going to completely take over the game because their defense is excellent. Everybody had questions about the skill position guys this year. I think Justin Jefferson is opening a lot of people's eyes. I think Nick Brissett is opening a lot of people's eyes. Edwards-Helaire has been great the last couple of weeks. They just need him to be steady and occasionally great, and that's exactly what he's been. That's why they're number 5 in the country.
I think that's a good point to call him, say occasionally great, because I do think, he came into this game completing less than 50% of his passes. But on Saturday, he goes 18 for 25, 292 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, by far his best game. And, he had played, decently enough, and he'd avoided mistakes. Right now he has 6 touchdown passes and no interceptions. So I think, they're getting everything that they expected and hoped for with Joe Burrow so far. But now, obviously it's going to be a bigger challenge, as this schedule gets even tougher. Obviously they beat Auburn, and beating Ole Miss is, no small feat. Even with the bad defense, they shut down A.J. Brown pretty well. I think you got to give LSU's defense a ton of credit in that game. I think A.J. Brown could be a first-round pick next year. So I think, anything they could do to limit him. 45-16, that's a total beatdown, especially against an Ole Miss team that, offensively had looked really good in every game except against Alabama. So I think, certainly LSU, to use Luke's phrase, opening a ton of people's eyes right now. I don't think many people expected them to be in this position going into, the hardest part of their schedule.
Yeah, because now, starting really next week into the next following weeks, they're going to face a top 25 ranked team every single week. You've got this game, this upcoming week that's going to be on CBS. It's going to be a 2:30 game. The Georgia game was announced today. That'll be a 2:30 start. Then you're looking at, that's going to be against Georgia. And then you're looking at having to play a state team. And then clearly you're going to have an Alabama team that's going to be obviously still number 1 in the country unless something else happens, unless, an asteroid comes and basically takes out like half of the team or something like that.
Unless
or they get polio.
Tua Tagovailoa just decides not to play football anymore.
Yeah. When you know that, like, Jalen Hurts has played.
To let him do it.
Tua's so good.
He's so good. Jalen Hurts has played more than Tua Tagovailoa at this point. And we'd be remiss if we did not talk about how this LSU defense has basically done exactly what they were set out to do. I think it's one of the best defenses in college football. I would put them up against any other defense in the nation right now. And if you look at a guy like Greedy Williams, he had 10 tackles in the game. You had Jacob Phillips, who had 6. You had Devin White, who I think is going to be the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. He had 6 tackles, including tackles for loss. But Grant Delpit, and this is an interesting thing today. So Grant Delpit, obviously, this is his line from the game against Ole Miss. He had 5 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. He had an interception and a sack and a quarterback hurry, along with a pass breakup. That is a wonderful stat line. And obviously, after the game was over, it was Delpit for Heisman. Today, John Battle came out and said during player interviews after Ed Orgeron talked, said that he feels like, since he was able to see both, that Grant Delpit is maybe picking it up a little bit faster than Jamal Adams did when he was there.
Wow.
Well, Jamal Adams came back today and said, hey, look, let that kid be, like, let him be him. Let him, march his own name and write his own name. And, I can understand the comparisons. That's cool, but I want him to make his own name. But he wants everybody to make sure that when the president was involved, the president was still a very capable, much capable defensive back in terms of just how he was able to hit, how he was able to defend. So Jamal Adams is watching. He's watching unlovingly, but he is definitely watching what Grant Delpit is doing. I
think Grant Delpit is one of my favorite players in college football right now. He is the closest thing to let me walk this back a little bit. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick was the closest thing to Tyrann Mathieu as a college football player.
It's not a bad,
since Mathieu. But Delpit is getting there, man. You look at his stat line for the year: 6.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 3 passes broken up, 2 picks. Guy's just all over the field. 27 tackles. He's everywhere. And then you look at the size of him. The guy's 6'3" defensive back.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to make a lot of money, and I'm just really thrilled to just watch this kid develop the way he has. And I think going into the year, that LSU defense was all Greedy Williams and Devin White, and then you hope the rest of the guys develop around them. But I think Delpit has been their best defensive player, and you look at Jacob Phillips has been a great player for him this year. Divinity's been really nice. They're just loaded as usual, and they're playing without some guys too. They haven't had K'Lavon Chasen since the first game of the year. They're really, really good, and I'm eager to see how that works against Florida this week. I know Florida hasn't really exactly been an offensive juggernaut this year, but they always seem to match up really well. And Florida's they're back in the rankings now, and playing a little bit better than they were at the beginning of the year. So interested to see how that LSU defense matches up against Florida's offense, and really vice versa too. So I think Florida's defense is pretty legit.
Yeah. And I definitely think this would be the time that Jeff would probably rein y'all in.
Here we go.
Yeah, we got a little LSU flavor on this panel. But I do want to touch on the Jamal Adams thing. I think it's interesting, that he, came out and said that, because Alvin Kamara recently, I think it was end of training camp, said something about why he doesn't like players, making comparisons, media making comparisons between other players. And he actually talked about it last week, because a lot of people wanted to compare Saquon Barkley to him just because he has that, versatile skill set. But what he said was that, when you peg it, and I actually love making player comparisons, but I think, and that's what NFL scouts do when they look at college guys. Yeah. But one thing he said is that, it puts a guy in a box. Like Reggie Bush, for example. Reggie Bush was being compared to Barry Sanders. So no matter, it would have taken 1 in a million for him to ever live up to that. And I think that's why, people don't necessarily appreciate what he did. Whereas Alvin Kamara, I don't know who he's been compared to, but he's certainly been better than anyone that, would have been the case. I think I looked up, I think it was Thomas Jones was his NFL.com draft comparison. And certainly I think from what we've seen, Thomas Jones was a really good player. Probably doesn't get the respect he deserved, for all those years in the league. But I definitely think Alvin Kamara has done that. So I think, I don't blame Jamal Adams for just, letting everyone know that, these guys can can create their own story.
And I'll read what he said. He said, "I respect and appreciate the comparison, but let number 9 make his own name. Now, onto this comment below. We pushed in the envelope a little too far. He has the potential to become a top 10 pick for sure, but until then, the Prez is on top. Ha ha ha. I'm a rare breed. Love." And that was to our own Brody Miller, because obviously Brody, that's where I saw it. So Brody tweeted that out, and he was responding, quote tweeting Brody, talking about obviously, with John Batt, what he said. So obviously, he's coming from a place, and I mean, obviously, guys like that, I don't know if you guys saw it over the weekend, but obviously the Panthers were off this weekend. Dante was on the sidelines. And I mean, all these guys have known each other for so long that, obviously for him, the biggest thing that he obviously wants him to do is to succeed and go as further than like what I'm sure Jamal did, what Tre'Davious did, all these guys, DBU, that thing is serious, but it's also a very tight-knit deal. So it's like that idea where I'm sure, he still wants to have a little bit of that LSU luster, but I mean, he is only going to want to see his kids go as far and succeed, and everything that I'm sure he did and what the rest of those guys have done too.
Definitely. And I mean, Jamal, very good player. But
yes.
When you're with the Jets, you can't talk about quite being on top.
That's a good point.
We got to see them win a few more games. But real quick, I do think we should also mention Tulane. Big win over Memphis. I don't know, if we need to spend too much time on this, but I mean, they won 40-24. It was a big win, bouncing back, after losing to Ohio State, which I actually thought they did better against Ohio State than people expected. Von Bell, the Saints safety, told me a few weeks ago that he thought, Ohio State would hang 70 in that game because that was, Urban Meyer's first game back. But I think Tulane, bouncing back to 2-3, and to get back on the LSU train, Justin McMillan, one pass, and a 51-yard touchdown.
Yep.
So I mean, clearly, this is just a sign that LSU, might be back, that they can afford to not have this guy around.
I had one of my friends recently call LSU QB2U. So I mean, that's good for Justin McMillan, man. That guy stuck it out at LSU for a while, and when the writing was on the wall, he made the move, and I think he told Chris Dabe. Or somebody told Chris Dabe, who was out of the game, that McMillan said this is the first of many. He's got another year after this one. So I think it's good to see these guys. When we hear a lot about players transferring and how it's become kind of this thing in college football now, especially with quarterbacks. But if a guy's not going to be able to play, and it's clear, go to another place and see what you can do there, and I'm glad to see him having some early success there. And speaking of Tulane, what were you saying, Clyde? It's the first time in 11 tries.
11 tries that they beat Memphis.
Memphis is for a mid-major football conference, a pretty good football team. They've had some really good teams over the years, and they had some big-time skill position players on that team. Some guys that'll probably play in the NFL. And
Anthony Miller, second-round pick last year for the Bears.
Yeah.
He's hurt right now, but I think he's going to be a really good receiver for them.
Yeah, and they are the guy they had going into the game. What's his name? Running back. He's leading the country in rushing before the game. Tulane shut them down.
Yes,
and I think Willie Fritz, in my opinion, is a really good coach. He's in a tough situation at Tulane. With having to recruit to those academic standards, but I think I would have faith in that guy to build that into something more respectable than we've seen in recent history there.
Absolutely, 496 yards of total offense. The 12th time under Willie Fritz that they've amassed over 400 yards of offense in a game, and obviously, that was the biggest thing too, was Tulane trying to find a way to get any kind of offense going, and regardless of whether or not it was talking about just trying to get Jonathan Banks going or trying to get Taron Onclod going, just trying to get anything going. That had been their the problem against Wake Forest in the game that they very could have easily have won if things had gone a different way. The same thing with UAB. But I think the biggest thing specifically was the fact that when you have a team like Memphis, who was picked to finish in the preseason as a top team in the American West, when they're coming in averaging 593 yards total offense and you hold them to 277 yards, that's obviously a huge, huge key in terms of being able to not only get a key win at home. But obviously that's their second win, and now the biggest thing is, and we were talking about this a little bit on Thursday with Garland Gillen last Thursday, was the idea was when you looked at Tulane, when you looked at the American, it was the idea that, like, how were they going to get to bowl eligibility, and was that bowl eligibility just going to be straight up 6-6? Now with this win, it's possible. It's going to be tough starting this week at a Cincinnati team that's 5-0. And then you've got, just on that eastern side, you've got a 5-0 Cincinnati team. You've got a ranked UCF team with a Heisman candidate at quarterback. They're 4-0. You've got USF under Charlie Strong. They're 4-0. So the heavy hitters are on that side, specifically not only just for that, but also for whoever is going to finish that high enough to not only win the American championship, but be that team that could potentially be in that New Year's Six Bowl. Because that's what the American is. That's what all these Group of 5 teams are.
Right.
It's whatever team that they have highest ranked enough that doesn't take a loss at any point in time too late, and getting that New Year's Six Bowl for the conference, for the prestige, for the money, being in that game just like UCF did last year under Scott Frost. That's going to be the thing. The only other team they're going to have to play from that other eastern side is USF, but they've still got to play Navy. They've got to go on the road to Cincinnati. Houston has one of the top offenses in the nation. They've got Ed Oliver on defense.
Ed Oliver's pretty good.
He's pretty good. He's a pretty good. He's a pretty good guy. I'd love to hear where you guys think he's going to go in the draft next year. So they've got some games there.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Top one.
Yeah, top one. Yeah, that's good. Good. It's a high percentage. But they've still got to go on the road and play Tulsa, and they've got a few other games in there against Eastern Carolina and Navy, where I think there's a possibility they could get to 6. They could get to 6, but it's going to take a monumental effort because it's not going to be as easy. And it shows that the American is a little bit tougher than what people probably give it credit for.
Next week they go to Cincinnati, which is going to be a tough game. Bearcats are 5-0, but I imagine Tulane probably wants some revenge with last year on their mind. They lost by 1 point. Had that late field goal.
Yep.
It didn't go their way.
Yeah.
So we'll see if they can pull that up. But real quick, before we wrap everything up, I want to talk about one Saints topic that I don't think has gotten enough credit this year. I think Sean Payton is having a great season. I think Sean Payton has outcoached his opposing head coach in 3 of the 4 games, really every game except week 1 when the Bucs just found a way to perfectly unlock Fitzmagic and target the Saints cornerbacks when they clearly weren't ready for all those deep plays. But I think since then, he has made some incredible play designs. Just the call to put Taysom Hill in the offense as much as he has. It takes stones, man, to do something that takes the ball out of Drew Brees' hands in the red zone, especially. I think we're second guessing it now a little bit because Taysom and Kamara didn't connect on that pass. And you obviously would want Drew Brees the one throwing every pass possible. But that should have been a touchdown, and I think the fact that Sean Payton has the confidence in this player as well as his staff to draw up these plays and come up with ways to utilize a guy who I think most teams don't use their third string quarterback at all, and this guy's making a ton of big plays, and I think Sean Payton deserves a ton of credit for this team being 3-1.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think creativity is something that isn't rewarded often enough in coaching circles. I think you can get really stale really quickly and just rely on the stuff that works, and to go out there and always look for new wrinkles and new things that you can use your guys' exact skill sets and find the way to best utilize those and give you a chance to win. I think he's one of the best in the NFL at doing that, and he's not afraid to take risks on that stuff. It's why we see Taysom Hill out there on 19 different teams. Playing all these different positions because he knows he can impact the game in all these different ways. And it didn't work out the way I'm sure the Saints were hoping this past week. But just the fact that he's looking for that extra edge with these guys with unique skill sets, guys like Taysom and Alvin Kamara and others. I think that does deserve a high degree of praise.
And I guess this is a question for you guys too, and I guess it's maybe of a more broad question in terms of coming into this year, there was enough talk about who has something to prove. What does Drew Brees have to prove? What does Alvin Kamara have to prove? What does Mark Ingram and Demario Davis and P-Rob and all these guys? We talk about all these guys who seemingly has a team of dudes that are looking to overcome whatever, I don't know, maybe like the failings of last year, the Minnesota Miracle, the failings of the 3 years before that. But there's not really a lot of talk of like a guy like Sean Payton. Like, what does he need to prove? And is it interesting now in your mind to where like now we're talking about how Sean Payton's having a great year, where maybe underlying and underneath all that was a coach who, in my mind, sometimes I don't know if he gets the recognition he deserves among really the core NFL audience and core NFL fan base of being considered one of the top coaches in the NFL, alongside of Belichick, alongside of obviously you're always going to have guys who are going to like come in and win the Super Bowl. You're going to have whatever, Pete Carroll, whoever. But obviously now, does it feel like that? Now it seems like he has something to prove, and he's going out this year looking at how long he's been tenured in with this team in the NFL as a viable head coach. Maybe he's had that on his mind of like, I want to go out here and I want to have a year where I can call for Drew Brees and everybody and kind of reassert the fact that like I'm still here too.
Yeah, no, Sean Payton, Coach of the Year one time in his career. I don't know that necessarily you could argue. I mean, probably 2009 you could argue. He won in 2006, which certainly deserving that
Absolutely.
year. But right now I don't think anyone would even consider him, as a candidate. I think you'd probably look at Sean McVay and then probably Andy Reid with what the Chiefs have been doing. But certainly, I think he's definitely on another level. I think he really drew a lot of motivation from the way things went last year. I mean, we saw that, the way they sort of turned everything around, and, I mean, he was obviously largely responsible for that. And I think one thing, and I don't know if, we can give him credit for this, I think it's just the way things happen. The Saints, we said this earlier, they're not playing their best football. But you don't want to be playing your best football right now. I think one thing that sort of bit them last year is that they were playing their best football in, like, Week 9 or Week 10, whenever that Bills game was.
Yeah.
And I think, we saw sort of later in the season some teams started to figure out, Alvin Kamara just a little bit, not a lot. They started to, play that defense a little better. The Panthers probably could have won that playoff game in the wild card round. So I think, the Saints have to figure out a way to make sure that they continue ascending, and by the end of the year, that they're definitely at their peak. But as we wrap things up, just want to thank Jim and Catherine McPhail, the owners of the Balcony Sports Lounge. Once again, a shout-out to this beautiful view in Bay St. Louis. I'm actually staring out the window right now.
It's very nice at this time of night.
The sun has just gone down. We were talking during the sunset, but I'm sure it was beautiful. Mike Fusco, the GM of this fine establishment, Luke Augusta, our sound engineer, Michelle Tuggle, Mike Chauvin, and Quo Sylvie, who is here tonight from NOLA.com. And then you can also catch the Dat Chat on Thursday. Jeff, Clyde, and Sean Kazan from Fox 8 will co-host at 5:30 for Episode 7 at NOLA Brewing on Chapatulas. Right by my house. Definitely recommend Darkest Before the Dawn.
Yes, it's a great beer.
New Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
They call it an Oktoberfest. I think it's like a dark lager or something, but highly recommend it. And then you can find this podcast on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify. iTunes is my personal podcast
good one.
Listening method of choice, just because it's so easy.
That's true. You can also get us on Stitcher, Google Play, and the iHeart app now. You can get us on all three of those as well.
Awesome. Well, for Luke Johnson and Clyde Verdan and everyone from NOLA.com, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.